Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and return to your seats immediately. We are making an emergency landing due to an urgent security matter. I repeat, this is not a drill. The captain's voice cracked through the intercom as Flight 847 descended rapidly toward the nearest airport. Passengers gripped their armrests, flight attendants rushed down the aisles, and chaos filled the cabin. But this story? This story began 6 hours earlier, with a young woman who had no idea she was about to change everything. Her name was Zara Williams, and at just 24 years old, she had already shattered every glass ceiling in Silicon Valley. Sitting in the exclusive VIP lounge at Chicago O'Hare, she looked like any other traveler. Ripped jeans, oversized hoodie, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. But appearances can be deceiving, because Zara Williams was worth $3.2 billion, making her the youngest black woman to ever take a company public. She typed furiously on her laptop, completely absorbed in her work, when two executives at the table behind her started talking business. Their voices carried just enough for her to overhear something that would make your jaw drop. They were discussing a massive acquisition deal, $2 billion, and they had no idea they were sitting just feet away from the woman who was about to either make or break their entire company's future. Zara glanced at her boarding pass lying next to her coffee cup, Seat 1A, first class. Under normal circumstances, she would have taken her private jet, but a last-minute scheduling conflict meant flying commercial today. Little did she know, this flight would become the most talked-about journey in aviation history. If you're already hooked by this incredible story, welcome to Mirror Stories, where every story holds a mirror to humanity for truth and justice. Show us some love by clicking the like and subscribe button. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment where you're watching and what time it's for you right now. So to understand how a simple seat assignment could ground an entire flight and change multiple lives forever, you need to know who Zara Williams really was. Born and raised in Detroit, she grew up in a small apartment with her single mother, Maria, who worked double shifts at a local diner just to keep the lights on. While other kids were playing video games, 8-year-old Zara was teaching herself to code on an old computer her mother bought from a pawn shop. By age 12, she was building websites for local businesses. By 16, she had created her first app that caught the attention of tech scouts. But when she pitched her revolutionary artificial intelligence platform to investors during her freshman year at MIT, door after door slammed in her face. Too young, they said. Too inexperienced. Too risky. Some didn't even bother to hide their skepticism about a young black woman claiming she could revolutionize technology. So she did what any determined genius would do. She proved them all wrong. Working 18-hour days from her cramped dorm room, surviving on energy drinks and pure determination, Zara built her AI company from nothing. She called it Neural Network Solutions, and it would go on to become the fastest-growing artificial intelligence company in history. The rejection she faced from investors wasn't just about her age, it was about assumptions, biases, and people's inability to see brilliance when it didn't look like what they expected. But Zara channeled every no into fuel for her success. When her company went public at a valuation of $8 billion, she became not just wealthy, but generationally wealthy. Yet despite her incredible success, Zara remained remarkably humble. She still shopped at Target, still called her mother every day, and still remembered what it felt like to be underestimated. That's why she was flying commercial today instead of taking her private jet. Sometimes she just wanted to feel normal, to blend in with everyone else. But Zara wasn't traveling alone in spirit. Her best friend and business partner Marcus Chen had been by her side since their MIT days. Marcus was everything you'd want in a business partner. Brilliant, loyal, and fiercely protective of Zara. As an Asian American who had faced his own share of discrimination in the tech world, he understood the unique challenges Zara navigated daily. He was supposed to be on this flight too, but stayed behind to handle some last-minute legal paperwork for the acquisition deal. The crew on Flight 847 was equally impressive. Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran flight attendant with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile, had seen it all during her career. She prided herself on treating every passenger with equal respect, whether they were flying economy or first class. Sarah had worked her way up from cleaning planes to senior cabin crew, and she followed protocol to the letter while never forgetting the human element of her job. In the cockpit sat Captain James Morrison, a distinguished black pilot with 30 years of flying experience. Captain Morrison commanded respect the moment he walked into any room, not just because of his impressive resume, but because of his quiet confidence and unwavering professionalism. He had broken barriers throughout his career, becoming one of the youngest captains in the airline's history while mentoring countless pilots who came after him. But there was another passenger boarding Flight 847 that day, someone whose presence would turn this routine flight into a viral sensation. Richard Blackwell, a 50-something businessman with silver hair and an expensive suit that screamed old money. Richard had been flying first class for decades, collecting status points and privileges like trophies. He carried himself with the kind of entitlement that comes from never being told no, and he had very specific ideas about who belonged in first class and who didn't. What do you think happens when worlds collide at 30,000 feet? Have you ever witnessed discrimination firsthand, and how did it make you feel? Let me know in the comments below. As boarding began for Flight 847, none of these individuals knew they were about to become part of a story that would be shared millions of times across social media, spark nationwide conversations about privilege and assumption, and ultimately change airline policies forever. The stage was set, the players were in position, and what happened next would prove that sometimes the most ordinary moments can lead to the most extraordinary consequences. Zara Williams walked through the boarding gate with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place at every table she'd ever sat at. As a first-class passenger, she was among the first to board Flight 847, and she made her way down the narrow aisle toward her assigned seat. Row 1, Seat A, the most coveted spot on the entire aircraft. She settled into the plush leather seat, immediately pulling out her tablet and spreading her crucial deal documents across the small table. $2 billion hung in the balance of the acquisition she was finalizing, and every detail needed to be perfect. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, reviewing contracts and financial projections that would reshape an entire industry. To anyone watching, she looked like just another young professional, maybe a consultant or a junior executive who had gotten lucky with an upgrade. But Zara Williams was about to discover that even $3.2 billion couldn't shield her from the assumptions people make based on what they see. The boarding process continued smoothly until a man in an expensive navy suit strutted down the aisle with the swagger of someone who owned the world. Richard Blackwell, silver-haired and commanding, stopped abruptly when he reached row 1. His eyes fell on Zara, and his expression immediately shifted from casual confidence to visible annoyance. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice carrying that particular tone that people use when they're absolutely certain they're right. "I think there's been some confusion here. This is my seat." Zara looked up from her tablet, maintaining her composure despite the interruption. "I'm sorry, but I believe you're mistaken. This is Seat 1A, and that's what my boarding pass shows." Richard's smile was patronizing as he reached into his jacket pocket. "Sweetheart, there's obviously been a mistake." The word sweetheart dripped with condescension, the kind that immediately signals to everyone within earshot that this man doesn't see the young black woman in front of him as his equal. "Let me show you my boarding pass." With theatrical flourish, Richard produced his boarding pass and held it toward Zara. Clear as day, printed in bold letters, Seat 1A, First Class. The tension in the cabin was immediate and palpable. Other passengers began to crane their necks, sensing drama unfolding in the premium cabin. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, instinctively knowing that whatever was about to happen might be worth recording. Sarah Martinez, the veteran flight attendant with 15 years of experience handling every possible passenger situation, approached with her professional smile firmly in place. "Is everything all right here, folks?" "Yes, there seems to be a seating issue," Richard said, his voice now carrying an edge of impatience. "This young lady is in my assigned seat." Sarah's trained eye immediately assessed the situation. She'd seen this scenario play out countless times before, but something about the dynamic felt different. The young woman in the seat wasn't flustered or defensive. She radiated a calm confidence that seemed almost out of place for someone who appeared to be in the wrong. "Could I see both of your boarding passes, please?" Sarah asked diplomatically. Zara handed over her boarding pass without hesitation. Sarah examined both documents carefully, her expression growing more puzzled by the second. Both passes clearly showed the same seat assignment. 1A, First Class, Flight 847. "Well, this is unusual," Sarah murmured, comparing the passes side by side. "Both of your boarding passes show seat 1A. Richard's response was immediate and dismissive. Obviously, the computer made an error. He gestured toward himself with the kind of self-importance that comes from decades of privilege. "I'm a gold status member with this airline. I've been flying first class for 20 years. There's clearly been some kind of system glitch that gave her an upgrade she shouldn't have received." The assumption hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Without knowing anything about Zara beyond her appearance, Richard had concluded that she must be the mistake, that someone like her couldn't possibly belong in first class on her own merit. Zara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "I purchased this ticket myself, and I can assure you, there's no mistake." She calmly showed her boarding pass again, pointing to the clearly printed details. "As you can see, this is my assigned seat." But Richard wasn't backing down. If anything, her calm response seemed to irritate him further. "Look, I'm sure you're a nice girl, but I have a very important business meeting in New York, and I always sit in 1A. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in economy? I'm sure the airline can work something out for you." The microaggressions were flowing freely now. Nice girl. The assumption that she'd be more comfortable in economy. The implication that her business, whatever it might be, couldn't possibly be as important as his. Each word was a small cut designed to diminish and dismiss. Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, recognizing the ugly undertones of what they were witnessing. Others seemed almost entertained, as if this was just another example of an entitled passenger causing a scene. Several had their phones out, recording what they sensed might become a viral moment. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. Both boarding passes were legitimate, both passengers were clearly assigned to the same seat, and the tension was escalating by the second. Her training told her to follow protocol and contact the gate agent, but something about the young woman's composure made her hesitate. "I understand this is frustrating for both of you," Sarah said carefully. "Let me contact the gate agent and see if we can resolve this quickly." Richard crossed his arms, his posture radiating entitlement. "I don't think we need to make this more complicated than it is. I'm gold status. I've had this seat reserved for weeks, and frankly, I think it's pretty obvious what happened here." Zara remained seated, her tablet still open to the multi-billion-dollar deal she was working on. Surrounded by documents that would have made Richard's important business meeting look like a casual coffee chat. But he couldn't see past his own assumptions to recognize that the young woman he was trying to displace might actually be the most powerful person on the entire aircraft. The other passengers continued to watch, some with growing discomfort as they recognized the racial undertones of the confrontation. The phones kept recording, capturing every microaggression, every dismissive gesture, every assumption that would soon make Richard Blackwell one of the most infamous passengers in airline history. Sarah keyed her radio to contact the gate agent, unaware that she was about to become part of a story that would spark nationwide conversations about privilege, assumption, and the dangerous habit of judging people by their appearance rather than their achievements. And through it all, Zara Williams sat quietly in seat 1A, the seat she had rightfully purchased, working on a deal that would reshape an entire industry while a privileged businessman tried to convince everyone around them that she didn't belong there. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. But what Richard Blackwell didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Zara Williams wasn't just another passenger who could be bullied into giving up her seat. She was about to teach everyone on Flight 847 a lesson about assumptions that they would never forget. And the consequences of this confrontation were about to extend far beyond a simple seating dispute. The situation was about to get much worse before it got better. As Sarah contacted the gate agent over her radio, Richard's patience was wearing thin, and his true colors were beginning to show. What started as condescending politeness was morphing into something much uglier. "You know what?" Richard said, his voice growing sharper. "I think we need to see your real ticket, not some printout or mobile boarding pass that could have been doctored. I want to see the actual confirmation from the airline." The accusation hung in the air like a slap. He was essentially calling Zara a fraud, suggesting that she had somehow fabricated her boarding pass to steal his seat. The passengers around them exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even those who had been mildly entertained by the drama were beginning to sense that this had crossed a line. "Sir, I can assure you my boarding pass is completely legitimate," Zara replied, her voice still steady despite the growing insult. But Richard wasn't done. "Look, I don't want to be unkind here, but let's be realistic," Richard continued, gesturing dismissively. "Someone like you probably belongs back in economy anyway. I'm sure you'd be much more comfortable with people more suited to your situation." The coded language was crystal clear to everyone listening. "Someone like you. More suited to your situation." He might as well have said what he really meant, but he was too practiced in the art of polite racism to be that direct. Sarah's radio crackled to life and she stepped aside to speak with the gate agent. The conversation was hushed, but those nearby could catch fragments of it. After several minutes, Sarah returned with an expression that suggested the news wasn't good for Zara. "I've spoken with the gate agent," Sarah announced carefully. "There seems to have been a system error that resulted in duplicate seat assignments. Given that Mr. Blackwell has gold status and has been a loyal customer for many years, and considering that his reservation was made several weeks ago, they're asking if you might be willing to move to economy temporarily while we sort this out." The word temporarily was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and everyone knew it. Once the plane was airborne, there would be no sorting anything out. Zara would spend the entire flight in economy, while Richard enjoyed the first-class service he believed he deserved. But what happened next revealed something profound about Zara Williams' character. As she sat there, facing this moment of public humiliation, her mind flashed back to another time, another place, when she had faced similar treatment. She was 8 years old again, standing in the cafeteria at her elementary school in Detroit. The teacher had announced that there would be a special advanced computer class. But when young Zara raised her hand to volunteer, she was told that maybe she should focus on her regular studies first. The implication was clear. A little black girl from the wrong side of town probably wasn't cut out for advanced computer programming. That day, her mother had taught her a valuable lesson. "Dignity isn't about making the biggest noise, baby girl," Maria Williams had said. "Sometimes dignity means knowing your worth even when others can't see it. You pick your battles, but you never forget who you are." Now 24 years old and worth billions, Zara faced the same choice her 8-year-old self had faced. She could make a scene, demand justice, insist on her rights. She could pull out her phone and show them exactly who they were dealing with. She could call her assistant and have this entire airline's management team on the phone within minutes. Or she could choose dignity. Zara quietly closed her tablet and began gathering her documents. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Richard's face lit up with smugness as he watched her prepare to vacate what he considered his rightful seat. "See? I knew we could work this out reasonably," Richard said, his tone now dripping with false magnanimity. "I'm sure you'll be perfectly comfortable back there." As Zara stood up, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. "Hey, seeing some delays on the flight tracker. Everything okay? The lawyers are asking about the timeline for the deal closing." Zara looked at the message for a long moment, then quietly slipped the phone back into her pocket without responding. Marcus had no idea that his best friend and business partner was being publicly humiliated on a commercial flight, forced to give up her rightfully purchased seat because a racist businessman couldn't imagine that she belonged in first class. Richard settled into seat 1A with the satisfaction of a man who had just proven that the natural order of the world was still intact. He spread his own documents across the table, adjusted his reading glasses, and began reviewing what appeared to be a relatively routine business proposal. Nothing that would change the world, nothing that would create jobs or revolutionize industries. Just the kind of incremental deal-making that had made him wealthy, but not remarkable. Sarah escorted Zara toward the economy section, her professional demeanor masking what appeared to be growing discomfort with the situation. There was something about this passenger that didn't add up, something about her composure and quiet confidence that suggested they might have just made a terrible mistake. As the final passengers boarded and the cabin crew began their safety preparations, the captain announced that they would be departing shortly. The engines began to warm up, and Flight 847 prepared for what everyone assumed would be a routine journey to New York. But as the plane pushed back from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway, something interesting happened in the economy section. Zara Williams, squeezed into a middle seat between a chatty businessman and a college student with oversized headphones, pulled out her phone and made a very quiet, very deliberate phone call. "This is Zara Williams," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an unmistakable tone of authority. "I need you to run a comprehensive background check on Northwest Flight 847, departing Chicago O'Hare today. I want to know everything about this aircraft, this route, and the passenger manifest. I need it done now." The person on the other end of the call must have asked for clarification, because Zara continued, "Yes, I'm currently on the flight, and I want you to pull all the financial data on Northwest Airlines' parent company, their board of directors, and their major shareholders. Send everything to my secure server within the next 10 minutes. Richard, settled comfortably in first class, happened to glance back toward economy during this phone call. Something about Zara's posture, the way she held herself even in the cramped economy seat, caught his attention. For the first time since boarding, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Sarah, who was performing her final safety checks, also noticed the phone call. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the body language, the quiet authority, the way this passenger commanded attention even while speaking in whispers. Sarah had worked with enough high-profile passengers over the years to recognize the signs of real power, and what she was observing didn't match the story they'd all been told about a mistaken upgrade and a system error. The plane began its acceleration down the runway, and Richard felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful assertion of his privilege. He had no idea that the young woman he had just humiliated was about to turn his world completely upside down, or that his name was about to become synonymous with everything wrong with entitled, privileged behavior. As Flight 847 lifted off from Chicago, climbing into the late afternoon sky, none of the passengers could have imagined that this flight would never make it to New York as planned, or that within the next hour, the entire aviation industry would be talking about what happened in Seat 1A. The mystery phone call was just the beginning. 30,000 feet above the American Midwest, Flight 847 was cruising smoothly through clear skies when Captain James Morrison's radio crackled to life with a transmission that would change everything. "Northwest Flight 847, this is Chicago Control. We have an urgent priority message for you. Please respond immediately." Captain Morrison, with his 30 years of flying experience, had heard urgent messages before, but something in the controller's tone made him sit up straighter in his seat. "Chicago Control, this is Northwest 847. Go ahead with your priority message." "Flight 847. We need immediate priority passenger identification. We have a high-value individual on your aircraft who requires special protocol. Stand by for further instructions." The captain exchanged glances with his co-pilot. In 3 decades of flying, he'd transported celebrities, politicians, and business leaders, but he'd never received a mid-flight priority identification request. This was unprecedented. Chicago Control, can you provide more details about this passenger identification request? Flight 847, we're sending encrypted passenger data to your secure communication system now. You need to locate the individual immediately and ensure their safety and comfort. This comes from the highest levels of airline management. In the cabin, Sarah Martinez was going through her routine service when her communication device buzzed with an urgent message from the cockpit. The message was brief but stunning. Need to identify and locate passenger Zara Williams immediately. Treat as highest priority VIP. Approach with utmost respect and discretion. Sarah's blood ran cold. Zara Williams, the young woman they had just forced to move to economy, the woman Richard Blackwell had dismissed and humiliated, the woman who had made that mysterious phone call right after takeoff. Sarah's hands were actually trembling as she made her way toward the economy section. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what she had missed, what they had all missed. 15 years of experience told her that when airline management sends mid-flight VIP identification requests, you're dealing with someone extraordinarily powerful. She found Zara exactly where they had left her, squeezed into the middle seat, still working quietly on her tablet, despite the cramped conditions. But now, looking at her again, Sarah could see what she had missed before. The quiet confidence, the expensive watch, the way she carried herself even in the worst seat on the plane. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice now carrying a tone of deep respect that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "Could you please come with me? I'd like to speak with you privately." Zara looked up calmly, as if she had been expecting this moment. There was no surprise in her eyes, no vindication, just a quiet acknowledgement that the truth was finally coming to light. But Richard Blackwell, comfortably settled in seat 1A, couldn't help but notice the sudden flurry of activity. He watched as Sarah approached the economy section with an urgency he hadn't seen before. He strained to hear fragments of the conversation, and what he heard made his stomach drop. "So sorry for the confusion earlier," Sarah was saying. "If you could please come with me to the front of the aircraft." Richard's business instincts, owned by decades of corporate politics, immediately kicked in. Something was very wrong. Flight attendants don't apologize to passengers they've just moved to economy unless something major has changed. His eyes narrowed as he watched Sarah escort Zara toward the front of the plane. And for the first time since boarding, genuine concern flickered across his face. Other passengers had started to notice the unusual activity as well. The college student who had been sitting next to Zara whispered to his friend, "Dude, they're treating that woman totally differently now. Something's up." A businesswoman in row 3 pulled out her phone and quickly typed, "Witnessing some serious drama on my flight right now. Young black woman forced to give up her first-class seat, now crew treating her like royalty. Something big is happening. #flight drama, what just happened?" The tweet would be the first of hundreds. Richard tried to appear nonchalant, but his years of reading corporate situations told him he might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. He attempted to catch Sarah's attention as she passed by with Zara. "Excuse me, Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying a forced casualness that fooled nobody. "I hope there's no problem with our earlier seating arrangement. I want you to know that if there was any misunderstanding, I'm certainly willing to work something out." The words hung in the air like a desperate plea. This was the same man who had called Zara sweetheart, demanded to see her real ticket, and suggested she belonged in economy with people more suited to her situation. Now he was backtracking, his tone suddenly conciliatory, his arrogance replaced by barely concealed panic. Sarah didn't even acknowledge Richard's comment. Her focus was entirely on Zara, treating her with a deference that was impossible to miss. Other passengers began pulling out their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A teenager in row 5 started filming discreetly, whispering into her phone, "You guys are not going to believe what's happening on my flight right now. This woman got kicked out of first class by some entitled white guy, and now the flight crew is acting like she's the Queen of England or something." The video would have 50,000 views before the plane landed. Richard's panic was now visible to anyone paying attention. He kept glancing toward the front of the plane, where Zara had disappeared with Sarah, then looking around nervously at the other passengers who were clearly documenting the situation. His phone buzzed with what appeared to be business messages, but he couldn't focus on anything except the growing realization that he had severely miscalculated. A woman in row 2 had managed to capture part of the original confrontation on video and was now live tweeting the entire saga. Thread: Racist businessman forces young black woman out of first-class seat. Plot twist: crew now treating her like VIP. I think we just witnessed a major mistake. 115 ints. Another passenger posted on Instagram, currently on a flight where white privilege just met its match. This woman they kicked to economy might be someone very important. Flight crew looking panicked. Karma, flight drama. The hashtags flight drama, karma, and what just happened were already starting to trend. Richard tried to focus on his business documents, but the words were swimming on the page. Every instinct he had developed in 40 years of corporate life was screaming that he had just made the kind of mistake that destroys careers and reputations. He found himself straining to hear any fragment of conversation from the front of the plane, any clue about what was happening with the woman he had so confidently dismissed. The college student who had been sitting next to Zara was now on FaceTime with his girlfriend. "Babe, you're not going to believe this. I was sitting next to this woman who got totally disrespected by some rich white dude, and now it turns out she might be like super important or something. The whole crew is freaking out." A business traveler in row 6 posted on LinkedIn, "Fascinating case study in unconscious bias happening in real time on my flight. Businessman makes assumptions based on appearance, forces passenger to give up seat. Now crew treating that same passenger as VIP, wondering if we just witnessed a major lesson about prejudice." The social media storm was building momentum, and Richard Blackwell was about to become the unwilling star of a viral sensation. His name, his face, his actions, all of it was being documented and shared in real time by dozens of passengers who had witnessed his behavior and were now watching the dramatic reversal unfold. But none of them yet knew the full truth about who Zara Williams really was, or just how spectacular Richard's downfall was about to become. They were all about to discover that sometimes the most powerful person on the plane is the one you least expect. What happened next would go down as one of the most spectacular reversals of fortune in airline history. And it all started when Captain James Morrison did something he had never done in 30 years of flying. He left the cockpit mid-flight to personally address a passenger. The cabin fell into an eerie silence as passengers saw the distinguished pilot walking down the aisle, his captain's stripes gleaming under the cabin lights. This wasn't a routine announcement or a casual check-in. This was unprecedented, and everyone could feel the gravity of the moment. Captain Morrison approached Zara, who was now standing in the galley area with Sarah, and his words would change everything everyone thought they knew about this flight. "Miss Williams," Captain Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of profound respect and barely concealed embarrassment. "I've just received a personal phone call from Jonathan Bradley, the CEO of Northwest Airlines. He wanted me to personally ensure your comfort and extend his deepest apologies for the treatment you've received on our aircraft today." The words hit the cabin like a physical force. The CEO of the airline had personally called the pilot, mid-flight, about one passenger. The implications were staggering. But Captain Morrison wasn't finished. What he said next would turn Richard Blackwell's world completely upside down and make every passenger on that flight witnesses to one of the most dramatic reveals in aviation history. "Miss Williams, Mr. Bradley also wanted me to remind you that as a 15% shareholder in Global Aviation Holdings, Northwest Airlines' parent company, you have his personal guarantee that this situation will be thoroughly investigated and that appropriate measures will be taken." The silence that followed was deafening. 15% shareholder of the parent company. Zara Williams didn't just fly on this airline, she virtually owned it. Every eye in first class turned toward Richard Blackwell, and what they saw was a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. The color drained from his face so completely that he looked like he might faint. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. This was the woman he had called sweetheart. The woman he had told belonged in economy. The woman he had accused of having a fake ticket. She owned 15% of the company. The businessman who had been so confident in his gold status, so certain of his importance, so assured of his place in the hierarchy, suddenly realized he had just humiliated one of the most powerful people in the aviation industry. And every second of his racist, condescending behavior had been witnessed by dozens of passengers, many of whom had filmed the entire encounter. The teenage girl in row 5 whispered into her phone, "Oh my God, you guys, she owns the airline. The woman they kicked out of first class literally owns the company. This white guy is so screwed." But what happened next revealed the true measure of Zara Williams' character. Instead of demanding revenge, instead of using her power to destroy the man who had humiliated her, she chose a different path. "Captain Morrison," Zara said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had always known her worth, even when others couldn't see it. "I appreciate Mr. Bradley's call and his concern. I don't require any personal punishment for Mr. Blackwell, but I would like to request a comprehensive review of your airline's policies regarding seat assignments and customer service training." Her grace in the moment was stunning. She could have had Richard Blackwell banned from the airline forever. She could have demanded his head on a platter. She could have used her influence to make his life a living nightmare. Instead, she chose to focus on systemic change rather than personal revenge. "Furthermore," Zara continued, "I'd like to commend your flight attendant Sarah Martinez for her professionalism throughout this situation. I believe she would be an excellent candidate to lead training programs on unconscious bias and inclusive customer service." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. In 15 years of flying, she had never seen anyone handle such a situation with more dignity and grace. Here was a woman who had been publicly humiliated, forced to give up her rightfully purchased seat, and subjected to racist microaggressions, and her response was to recommend the flight attendant for a promotion. But the story wasn't over for Richard Blackwell. As if the universe itself was delivering poetic justice, Captain Morrison's radio crackled with another message from ground control. "Northwest 847, we're coordinating an unscheduled stop in Cleveland. We have a passenger who needs to be removed from the aircraft due to disruptive behavior and violation of airline policy." Richard's business documents scattered to the floor as his hands began shaking. He was going to be removed from the flight, not Zara. Him. The man who had been so confident in his privilege, so certain of his importance, was about to be escorted off the plane in front of everyone who had witnessed his behavior. The passengers who had been filming were beside themselves with excitement. This wasn't just drama. This was justice being served in real time. The hashtags Karma at 30,000 feet and #Billionaire versus Racist began trending worldwide. As the plane began its descent toward Cleveland for the unscheduled stop, Zara Williams walked back to seat 1A. Her seat, the seat she had purchased, the seat she had always belonged in. She settled back into the plush leather, pulled out her tablet, and did something that would complete one of the most satisfying justice stories ever captured on social media. She made a video call. "Marcus," she said as her business partner's face appeared on the screen, "sorry for the delay in getting back to you. I'm ready to close the deal now." And there, at 30,000 feet, while Richard Blackwell was being escorted off the plane by airport security in Cleveland, Zara Williams completed her $2 billion acquisition. The biggest deal in her company's history, finalized from seat 1A, the seat that racist privilege had tried to steal from her. The passengers around her watched in awe as this young woman, who had been dismissed and humiliated just hours earlier, calmly negotiated terms worth more money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes. The college student who had sat next to her in economy posted a video that would get 5 million views. "I was literally sitting next to a billionaire and didn't even know it. This woman just handled racism and closed a $2 billion deal in the same day. I can't even." Sarah Martinez was promoted to regional training director the following week, leading workshops on unconscious bias that would be implemented across the entire airline system. Richard Blackwell's gold status was permanently revoked, and the video of his behavior became a case study in business schools across the country about the dangers of prejudice and assumption. If this incredible story of justice and redemption has kept you glued to your screen, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because stories like this remind us that karma really is undefeated. But perhaps the most powerful moment came as Flight 847 finally touched down in New York. As Zara walked off the plane, she stopped to shake hands with Captain Morrison and Sarah Martinez. To the captain, she said, "Thank you for your professionalism today. Your airline is lucky to have you." And to Sarah, she said, "I hope you'll accept the training position. The aviation industry needs more people like you who are willing to learn and grow." As Zara Williams walked through JFK Airport, her $2 billion deal complete, her dignity intact, and her faith in justice restored, she proved something that Richard Blackwell and countless others like him would never understand. True power isn't about forcing others down. It's about lifting everyone up while standing firmly in your own worth. The story of Flight 847 would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of individual justice, but as a reminder that in a world still plagued by prejudice and assumption, sometimes the most ordinary moment can become extraordinary when someone has the courage to stand up for what's right and the wisdom to use their power with grace. 3 weeks after Flight 847 made headlines around the world, Zara Williams sat in her corner office overlooking downtown Chicago, but her mind wasn't on the billion-dollar deals flowing across her desk or the tech empire she had built from nothing. She was thinking about power, real power, and what it truly means to wield it responsibly. The story of her confrontation with Richard Blackwell had become a global phenomenon. The hashtag Flight847Justice had been shared over 50 million times. News outlets from CNN to the BBC had covered the story. Business schools were already using it as a case study in unconscious bias and corporate leadership. Richard Blackwell himself had become the unwitting poster child for privileged entitlement, his name forever linked to one of the most spectacular examples of instant karma ever caught on camera. But for Zara, the real victory wasn't in Richard's public humiliation or even in the policy changes that Northwest Airlines had implemented company-wide. The real victory was in what happened next, in the conversations that started, in the young people who reached out to her saying they felt inspired to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles they faced. "You know," Zara reflected in an interview that would later be watched by millions, "when I was sitting in that economy seat, being told I didn't belong in first class, I had a choice. I could have pulled out my phone right then and there, called the CEO, made a scene, used my power like a weapon. But my mother taught me something important when I was 8 years old, something that shaped how I approach every challenge in life." The interview had been conducted in the Maria Williams Technology Center, a state-of-the-art facility that Zara had built in her old Detroit neighborhood. Named after her mother, the center provided free computer programming classes to underprivileged children, giving them the same opportunities that young Zara had to teach herself to code on that old pawnshop computer. "Mama told me that true strength isn't about proving you're the strongest person in the room," Zara continued, watching through the window as dozens of children worked on coding projects, their faces lit up with the same excitement she had felt decades earlier. "True strength is about lifting others up while you climb. It's about using your power to create opportunities for people who haven't had the same chances you've had." The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. Here was a woman who could buy and sell Richard Blackwell 100 times over, who could have destroyed his career with a single phone call, choosing instead to focus on systemic change rather than personal revenge. The policy changes she had requested from Northwest Airlines were now being implemented across the entire aviation industry, creating better training programs for staff and clearer protocols for handling discrimination complaints. Sarah Martinez, now the regional training director, had become the face of these changes. Her unconscious bias workshops were being rolled out to airlines worldwide, and she never failed to credit Zara Williams with giving her the opportunity to turn a moment of corporate embarrassment into meaningful industry transformation. What Miss Williams taught all of us that day, Sarah said in her own interview, is that how you handle your worst moment can define not just your character, but your impact on the world. She could have used her power to punish. Instead, she used it to educate. The ripple effects continued to spread in ways that even Zara hadn't anticipated. The video footage from Flight 847 had been used in diversity training programs at Fortune 500 companies. Universities were requiring business students to analyze the case study. Most importantly, young entrepreneurs who had faced similar discrimination were finding their voices, sharing their stories, and demanding better treatment in boardrooms and business meetings across the country. But perhaps the most powerful testament to Zara's character came 6 months after the incident, when she was spotted on another flight, this time deliberately sitting in economy class, mentoring a teenage girl who was heading to her first coding competition. The girl, Aaliyah Johnson, was 16 years old and had grown up in circumstances remarkably similar to Zara's own childhood. Single mother, financial struggles, but an incredible gift for technology and an unshakable determination to succeed. Aaliyah had reached out to Zara through the foundation, and when she mentioned she was nervous about flying alone to the National Coding Championship, Zara did something that would have shocked Richard Blackwell to his core. She bought an economy ticket on the same flight just to sit next to this young woman and offer encouragement. "I don't need first class to feel important," Zara told Aaliyah as they worked together on coding problems during the flight. "First class is just a seat. What matters is how you treat the person sitting next to you, whether they're in first class or economy. Your worth isn't determined by where you sit. It's determined by what you do with the opportunities you're given." The moment was captured by another passenger and shared on social media. But this time, the message was different. Instead of justice and karma, this was about mentorship and humility. Here was a billionaire who could afford to fly private, choosing to sit in the back of the plane because that's where she was needed most. Aaliyah would go on to win the National Coding Championship, and the scholarship money would allow her to attend MIT, the same university where Zara had once been rejected by investors who couldn't see past their own biases. The cycle of opportunity and mentorship continued, creating ripples that would extend far beyond any single flight or confrontation. The story of Flight 847 had become more than just a viral moment. It had become a movement. Business leaders started examining their own unconscious biases. Airlines improved their training programs. Young people from underrepresented communities found inspiration in Zara's example of grace under pressure. But for Zara herself, the most meaningful outcome was the simplest one. She had proven once again that true power isn't about forcing others to recognize your importance, it's about using your influence to create opportunities for those who need them most. Richard Blackwell, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from public view. His business suffered as clients distanced themselves from the negative publicity. His country club membership was quietly revoked. His gold status with every airline was permanently suspended. He became a cautionary tale about the consequences of prejudice and entitlement, his name forever linked to one of the most spectacular examples of instant karma in modern history. The contrast couldn't have been starker. While Richard's world contracted, becoming smaller and more isolated, Zara's influence expanded, touching lives and creating opportunities on a global scale. She had chosen to respond to hatred with hope, to prejudice with progress, to discrimination with determination to do better. The Maria Williams Technology Center now served over 5,000 children annually, providing not just coding classes, but mentorship programs, scholarship opportunities, and career guidance. Many of the instructors were tech industry professionals who volunteered their time, inspired by Zara's example of giving back to the community that shaped her. During the center's first anniversary celebration, Zara stood before a room full of children who reminded her of herself at that age. Brilliant, determined, but facing obstacles that had nothing to do with their talent or potential and everything to do with circumstances beyond their control. Every one of you has the same spark that I had when I was your age, she told them, her voice carrying the weight of experience and the warmth of genuine care. The difference between dreaming and achieving isn't talent, it's opportunity and persistence. I'm here to help provide the opportunities, the persistence that has to come from you. The children listened with rapt attention, many of them already working on projects that would have impressed Silicon Valley veterans. They didn't see a billionaire or a corporate executive. They saw someone who understood their struggles and believed in their potential. One 10-year-old raised her hand and asked, "Ms. Zara, what would you do if someone told you that you didn't belong somewhere because of how you looked?" Zara smiled, remembering her 8-year-old self facing similar questions, and her mother's wisdom that had guided her through every challenge since then. "I would remember that belonging isn't about what other people think," she answered. "Belonging is about knowing your worth, treating others with respect, and using whatever power you have to make things better for the people coming behind you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show grace when others show you hatred, because that's how you change hearts and minds." The lesson extended far beyond that room, beyond that moment, beyond even the viral story that had brought it all together. It was a lesson about the true nature of power, about the choice we all have in how we respond to adversity, and about the ripple effects that a single act of grace can create. What would you do if you had Zara's power and faced the same situation? Would you choose revenge or redemption? Let me know in the comments below, because your answer says everything about the kind of leader you'd be. As the months passed, the story of Flight 847 evolved from a viral moment into something deeper and more lasting. It became a reminder that in a world too often driven by division and discrimination, there are still people who choose to respond to hatred with hope, to prejudice with progress, and to power with purpose. Zara Williams had proven that the most transformative kind of power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the wisdom to turn your enemies into opportunities for everyone to grow. She had faced down racism and entitlement, not with anger or revenge, but with dignity and grace, creating ripples of positive change that would continue long after the hashtags stopped trending and the news cycle moved on. If this incredible journey of transformation and triumph has inspired you to believe in the power of grace over revenge, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this remind us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose light over darkness, hope over hatred, and love over fear. The true measure of Zara Williams' success wasn't in her bank account or her business empire. It was in the lives she touched, the barriers she broke down, and the example she set for everyone who watched her turn a moment of humiliation into a movement of hope. She had shown the world that true power lies not in forcing others to recognize your worth, but in using your influence to help others recognize their own.